Video number 11. The wheelbarrow swayed as it bumped over a root. Dale managed to steady it. Seth groaned. He was naked, except for a white towel wrapped around his middle. Sorry, Seth, Dale said. This is a tricky path. Are we almost there? Kendra asked. Not much farther, Grandpa replied. They walked single file, Grandpa in the lead, followed by Dale pushing the wheelbarrow and then Kendra in the rear. What had begun as a nearly indiscernible trail near the barn had broadened into a well-trodden path. Later, they branched off onto a smaller track. They'd crossed no new paths since then. The woods seemed so quiet, Kendra said. They are quietest when you stay on the paths, Grandpa said. It seems too quiet. There is a tension in the air. Your brother committed a serious offense. The fall of a fairy is a woeful tragedy. The retribution of the fairies was equally brutal. Eager eyes await to see if the conflict will escalate. It won't, right? I hope not. If Muriel cures your brother, the fairies could interpret it as an insult. Will they attack him again? Probably not. At least not directly. The punishment had been administered. Can we heal the fairy? Grandpa shook his head. No. Could the witch? Seth was altered by magic imposed upon him, but the potential to fall and become an imp is a fundamental aspect of being a fairy. She transformed in accordance to a law that has existed as long as fairies have had wings. Muriel might be able to undo the enchantments forced upon Seth. Reversing the fall of a fairy would be far beyond her capacity. Poor fairy. They reached a fork in the path. Grandpa turned left. Almost there, he said. Keep silent as we converse with her. Kendra stared at the bushes and trees, expecting to find spiteful eyes glaring back at her. What creatures would come into view if all the greenery were removed? What would happen if she raced off the path? How long before some gruesome monster devoured her? Grandpa stopped, pointing away into the trees. Here we are. Kendra saw the leafy shack in the distance, off the path through the trees. Too much undergrowth for the wheelbarrow, Dale said, scooping Seth into his arms. Although Seth was much more blubbery, he had not increased in size. As they waded through the undergrowth, Dale carried him without much difficulty. The ivy-shrouded shack drew near. They walked around to the front. The filthy witch sat inside her back against the tree stump, chewing on a knot in a bristly rope. A pair of imps sat on the tree stump. One was skinny, one with prominent ribs and long, flat feet. The other was compact and plump. Hello, Muriel, Grandpa said. The imps sprang from the trunk and scurried out of sight. Muriel looked up, a slow grin revealing decayed teeth. Could that be Stan Sorensen? She rubbed her eyes theatrically and squinted at him. No, I must be dreaming. Stan Sorensen said he would never visit me again. I need your help, Grandpa said. And you brought company. I remember Dale. Who is this fine young lady? My granddaughter. She got none of your looks. Lucky for her. My name is Muriel, dear. Pleased to meet you. I'm Kendra. Yes, of course. Yes. You have that lovely pink nightgown with the bow on the bosom. Kendra shot a look at Grandpa. How could this crazy witch know about her pajamas? I know a thing or two, Muriel continued, tapping her temple. Telescopes are for stars, dears, not for trees. Pay her no heed, Grandpa said. She wants to give you the impression that she has the power to spy on you in your bedroom. Witches prey on fear. Her influence does not extend beyond the walls of this shack. Won't you step inside for some tea, she offered. What news she has comes from imps, Grandpa continued. And since imps are banned from the yard, her news came from a particular imp. Muriel let out a shrieking laugh. The crazed cackle suited her haggard appearance, much better than her speaking voice did. The imp saw your room and heard conversations from wherever Seth stashed it, Grandpa concluded. Nothing to fret about. Muriel raised a finger in objection. Nothing to fret about, you say. Nothing the imp saw or heard could be harmful, except perhaps her own reflection, Muriel suggested. Who is our final visitor? This poor, lumpy abomination. Could it be? She clapped her hands and giggled. Did our stalwart adventurer have a mishap? Did his clever tongue finally betray him? You know what happened, Grandpa said. I do, she cackled. I knew he was insolent, but never suspected such cruelty. Lock him in a shed, I say. For the sake of the fairies, lock him up tight. Can you restore him? Grandpa asked. Restore him? The witch exclaimed. After what he did? It was an accident, as you are aware. Why not ask me to rescue a killer from the noose, to spare a traitor from his shame? Can you do it? Shall I conjure up a medal for him to wear as well? A badge of honor for his crime? Can you? Mariel dropped the act. She regarded her visitors with a sly expression. You know the price. I can't loosen a knot, Grandpa said. Mariel tossed up her gnarled hands. Gnarled, that's a vocabulary word this week. I need the energy from the knot for the spell, she said. He has more than 70 separate hexes operating on them. You ought to untie 70 knots. What about no dickering? One knot, and your beastly grandson will be restored to his original form. Without the knot, I would never be able to counter the enchantment. This is fairy magic. You knew the price before you came. No dickering. Grandpa sagged. Show me the rope. Laid the boy at my threshold. Dale placed Seth in front of the door. Standing in the doorway, Muriel held the rope out to Grandpa. There were 2 knots. Both had dried blood on them. One was still moist with saliva. Take your pick, she said. Of my own free will, I sever this knot, Grandpa said, leaning forward. He blew gently on the higher of the 2 knots. It unraveled. The air trembled. On hot days, Kendra had seen the air shimmer in the distance. This was similar, but right in front of her. She felt pulsing vibrations, like she was standing in front of a powerful stereo speaker during a song with lots of bass. The ground seemed to be tipping. Muriel extended a hand over Seth. She mumbled on in an unintelligible incantation. His blubber rippled as if he were boiling inside. It looked like thousands of worms were under his skin, squirming to find a way out. Putrid vapor fumed up from his flesh. His fat appeared to be evaporating, his misshapen body convulsed. Kendra extended her arms and swayed as the ground teetered even more. There was a burst of darkness, an anti-flash, and Kendra stumbled, barely catching herself. The odd sensation ended. The air cleared and balance returned. Seth sat up. He looked exactly like his old self. No tusks, no flippers, no blowholes, just an 11-year-old kid with a towel wrapped around his waist. He scrambled away from the shack and got to his feet. Satisfied? Muriel asked. How do you feel, Seth? Grandpa inquired. Seth patted his bare chest. I feel better. Muriel grinned. Thank you, little adventurer. You did me a great service today. I am indebted. You shouldn't have done it, Grandpa, Seth said. Had to be done. He said we best be going. Stay a while, Muriel offered. No thanks, Grandpa said. Very well. Spurn my hospitality. Kendra, nice to meet you. May you find less happiness than you deserve. Dale, you are as mute as your brother and nearly as pale. Seth, please have another mishap soon. Stan, you lack the wit of an orangutan. Bless your soul. Don't be strangers. Kendra gave Seth socks, shoes, shorts, and a shirt. Once he put them on, they returned to the path. Can I ride in the wheelbarrow on the way back? Seth asked. You ought to push me, Dale grumbled. How did it feel being a walrus? Kendra asked. Is that what I was? A mutant, humpbacked walrus with a deformed tail, she clarified. Oh, I wish I had a camera. It was weird breathing through my back, and it was hard to move. Nothing felt right. Might be safer not to converse so loudly, Grandpa said. I couldn't talk, Seth said more quietly. I felt like I still knew how, but the words came out all tangled. My mouth and tongue were different. What about Muriel? Kendra asked. If she unties that last knot, will she be free? She was originally bound by 13 knots, Grandpa said. She can loosen none on her own, though it doesn't seem to stop her from trying. But other mortals can undo the knots by asking a favor and blowing on them. Powerful magic holds the knot in place. When released, Muriel can change that magic into granting the favor. So, if you ever need her help again, I will look elsewhere, Grandpa said. I never wanted her to get down to a single knot. Freeing her is not an option. I'm sorry I ended up helping her, Seth said. Did you learn anything from the ordeal? Where was I? Grandpa asked. Seth lowered his head. I feel really bad about the fairy. She didn't deserve what happened to her. Grandpa made no response, and Seth kept studying his shoes. I shouldn't have messed around with magical creatures, he finally admitted. Grandpa placed a hand on his shoulder. I know you meant no harm. Around here, what you don't know can hurt you, and others. If you have learned to be more careful and compassionate in the future, and to show greater respect for the inhabitants of this preserve, then at least some good came of all this. I learned something too, Kendra said. Humans and walruses should never mix. Chapter 9, Hugo. The triangular wooden board rested on Kendra's lap. She studied the pegs, planning her next jump. Beside her, Lena gently tilted back and forth on a rocker, watching the moonrise. From the porch, only a few fairies could be seen gliding around the garden. Fireflies twinkled among them in the silver moonlight. Not many fairies out tonight, Kendra said. It may be some time before the fairies return in force to our gardens. Lena said, Can't you explain everything to them? Lena chuckled. They would listen to your grandfather before they would ever heed me. Weren't you sort of one of them? That is the problem. Watch. Lena closed her eyes and began to sing softly. Her high, trilling voice gave life to a wistful melody. Several fairies darted over from the garden, hovering around her in a loose semicircle, interrupting the warbling tone with fervent chirping. Lena quit singing and said something in an unintelligible language. The fairies chirped back. Lena made a final remark, and the fairies flew away. What were they saying? Kendra asked. They told me I should be ashamed to sing a naiadic tune, Lena replied. They detest reminders that I was once a nymph, especially if those reminders imply that I am at peace with my decision. They acted pretty upset. Much of their time is spent mocking mortals. Any time one of us crosses over to mortality, makes the other wonder what they might be missing, especially if we appear content. They ridicule me mercilessly. You don't let it get to you. Not really. Okay, girl. They do know how to needle me. They tease me about growing old, my hair, my wrinkles. They ask how I will enjoy being buried in a box. Lena frowned, gazing thoughtfully into the night. I felt my age today when you called for help. What do you mean? Kendra jumped a peg on the triangular wooden board. I tried to rush to your aid, but ended up sprawled on the kitchen floor. Your grandfather reached your side before I did, and he is no athlete. It wasn't your fault. In my youth, I would have been there in a flash. I used to be handy in an emergency. Now I come hobbling to the rescue. You still get around great. Kendra was running out of moves. She'd already stranded a peg. Lena shook her head. I would not last a minute on the trapeze or the tightrope. Once I played on them with facile agility. The curse of mortality. You spend the first portion of your life learning, growing stronger, more capable, and then, through no fault of your own, your body begins to fail. You regress. Strong limbs become feeble. Keen senses grow dull. Hardy constitutions deteriorate. Beauty withers. Organs quit. You remember yourself in your prime and wonder where that person went. As your wisdom and experience are peaking, your traitorous body becomes a prison. Kendra had no moves left on her perforated board. 3 pegs remained. I never thought of it that way. Lena took the board from Kendra and began setting up the pegs. In their youth, mortals behave more like nymphs. Adulthood seems impossibly distant, let alone the enfeeblement of old age. But, ponderously, inevitably, it overtakes you. I find it a frustrating, humbling, infuriating experience. When we talked before, you said you would not change your decision, Kendra reminded her. True, given the opportunity, I would choose Patton every time, and now that I have experienced mortality, I do not imagine I could be content with my former life. But the pleasures of mortality, the thrills of living, come with a price. Pain, illness, the decline of age, the loss of loved ones, those things I could do without. The pegs were set up. Lena began jumping them. I am impressed by how glibly most mortals confront the deliberation of their body, debilitation of their body. Patton, your grandparents, many others, they just accept it. I've always feared aging. The inevitability of it haunts me. Ever since I abandoned the pond, the prospect of death has been a menacing shadow in the back of my mind. She jumped the final peg, leaving only one. Kendra had seen her do it before, but had not yet succeeded in copying her moves. Lena sighed softly. Because of my nature, I may have to endure old age for decades longer than regular human beings. The humiliating finale to the mortal condition. At least you're a peg-jumping genius, Kendra said. Lena smiled. The solace of my winter years. You can still paint and cook and do all sorts of things. I don't mean to complain. These are not problems to share with young minds. It's okay, you aren't scaring me. You're right. I can't really picture being grown up. Part of me wonders if high school will ever really happen. Sometimes I think maybe I'll die young. The door to the house opened, and Grandpa's head poked out. Kendra, I need to have some words with you and Seth. Okay, Grandpa, come to the study. Lena stood, motioning for Kendra to hurry along. Kendra entered the house and followed Grandpa into the study. Seth was already seated in one of the oversized chairs, drumming his fingers on the armrest. Kendra claimed the other one while Grandpa settled in behind his desk. The day after tomorrow is June 21st, Grandpa said. Do either of you know the significance of that day? Kendra and Seth shared a glance. Your birthday? Seth attempted. The summer solstice, Grandpa said. The longest day of the year. The night before is a holiday. Of riotous abandon for the whimsical creatures of Fablehaven. 4 nights a year, the boundaries that define where different entities can venture dissolve. These nights of revelry are essential to maintaining the segregation that normally prevails here. On Midsummer Eve, the only limits to where any creature can roam and work mischief are the walls of this house. Unless invited, they cannot enter. Midsummer Eve is tomorrow night, Seth said. I do not want to leave you time to fret over it. As long as you obey my instructions, the night will pass without incident. It will be loud, but you will be safe. What other days do they run wild? Kendra asked. The winter solstice and the 2 equinoxes. Midsummer Eve tends to be the rowdiest of them all. Can we watch out the windows? Seth asked eagerly. No, Grandpa said. Nor would you enjoy what you saw. On the festival nights, nightmares take shape and prowl the yard. Ancient entities of supreme evil patrol the darkness in search of prey. You will be in bed at sundown. You will wear earplugs, and you will not arise until sunrise dispels the horror of the night. Should we sleep in your room? Kendra asked. The attic playroom is the safest place in the house. Extra protections have been placed on it as a sanctuary for children. Even if, by some misfortune, unsavory creatures entered the house, your room would remain secure. Has anything ever gotten in the house? Kendra asked. Nothing unwanted has breached these homestead walls, Grandpa said. Still, we can never be too careful. Tomorrow, you will prepare some defenses to afford us an extra layer of protection. Because of the recent uproar at the ferries, I fear this could be a particularly chaotic Midsummer Eve. Has anyone ever died, Seth asked. On this property, I mean? We should save that topic for another time, Grandpa said, standing up. That one guy changed into dandelion seeds, Kendra said. Anybody else? Anybody else, Seth insisted. Grandpa regarded them soberly for a moment. As you are learning, these preserves are hazardous places. Accidents have occurred in the past. Those accidents generally happen to people who venture where they do not belong or tamper with matters beyond their understanding. If you adhere to my rules, you should have nothing to worry about. It's a good place to stop.